She heard the fighting before she saw it, the crack of bone, the wet, terrible sound of jaws finding flesh, and then silence, broken only by the shallow, rattling breathing of something dying in the dark. She should have run. Any sane woman, alone, pregnant, fleeing through the night from the worst betrayal of her life, would have turned away from those sounds and kept moving. But Revna Ashford had spent her entire life unable to walk past a wounded creature without stopping. It was the instinct that had made her a healer. It was the instinct that would change the course of her life. She pushed through the undergrowth and found a wolf. He was enormous, pale, furred, almost white in the moonlight, with a lean, powerful frame that spoke of years of combat training. His body was torn open across the ribs, a wound so deep she could see the white gleam of bone beneath the matted fur. His breathing was failing. His eyes were glazing over. She did not know his name. She did not know that he served the most powerful wolf in the Dominion. She only knew that he was dying, and she could not let one more thing be destroyed tonight. So she knelt in the blood-soaked grass and pressed her hands to his broken body. And the golden light that poured from her palms, the gift she had hidden her entire life, sealed his wounds and set into motion a chain of events that would reshape the fate of an entire kingdom. She just did not know it yet. The Sovereignty Hall of Kelvros had been built to hold 500 wolves. Tonight, it held nearly 3,000. Revna Ashford pressed her spine against the cold marble of the gallery pillar, her fingers gripping the stone so hard her knuckles had turned white. Below her, the ceremonial floor stretched in a vast circle of polished obsidian, ringed by 7 fire trenches that burned with pale blue flame. The heat rose in waves, but Revna felt nothing except the ice spreading through her chest. She should not be here. Servants were not permitted in the upper gallery during bonding ceremonies. If anyone recognized her face, if anyone connected the quiet herb woman from the northern kitchens to the man standing at the center of that obsidian floor, everything would unravel. But Fenric had promised her. 3 days ago, in the hidden chamber behind the waterfall where they had been meeting for 8 months, he had held her face between his palms and spoken the words she had carried like a flame ever since. After the ceremony, he had said, his gray eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch, "I will refuse the candidates. I will declare the binding void. And then I will bring you before the court and announce what we both already know." He had pressed his lips to the place behind her ear where her pulse raced. "You are my true mate, Revna. No council, no bloodline requirement, no political alliance will change that. I swear it on the marrow of my bones." She had believed every word. Now she watched from the shadows as Fenric Ashvane, alpha of the Grey March territory, and the wolf she had given her entire heart to, stood rigid on the ceremonial floor in formal black and bronze. His dark hair was pulled back from his angular face. His jaw was set like a man walking toward execution. His shoulders, broad enough to block a doorway, were locked in a posture that Revna had never seen from him before. Something was wrong. She leaned forward, her heart hammering. From this height, she could see the way his hands hung at his sides. Not relaxed, not the easy, confident stillness of the wolf who commanded an entire territory. His fingers were curled into half-fists, the tendons in his forearms visible even from the gallery, and his eyes. Even across the vast distance of the hall, Revna could tell that something was missing from them. The warmth, the sharp intelligence, the quiet fire that always burned brightest when he looked at her. His eyes looked dead. "The candidates will present themselves," the bond speaker announced from the raised stone platform at the north end of the hall. His voice rolled through the space like distant thunder. 6 women ascended from the eastern archway. They moved in single file, draped in ceremonial white and silver, their hair woven with moonflowers that glowed faintly in the blue firelight. Each one was stunning. Each one had been groomed for this moment since childhood. But it was the woman at the front of the procession who drew every eye in the hall. Soraya Kyle. Her hair fell in a cascade of deep copper against the white of her gown. Her features were sharp and aristocratic, her bearing that of someone who had never once questioned her right to stand exactly where she stood. The Kale family controlled the eastern ridgeline territories, commanded 4,000 warriors, and had been angling their eldest daughter toward Fenric's side for the better part of 2 years. The crowd murmured with approval that bordered on certainty. This was not a selection. This was a coronation. Revna's nails drew blood from her own palms. "Look at me," she willed silently. "Look up. Find me. Remember what you promised." Fenric did not move. The bond speaker raised his staff, and the hall fell into absolute silence. Even the flames in the trenches seemed to still. Fenric Ashvane, Alpha of the Grey March, blood of the Iron-Pact founders, you stand before the assembled wolves of Kelvros to declare your chosen bond. The candidates await your word. Speak your choice. The silence that followed was so complete that Revna could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the marble. Fenric stepped forward. His movement was wrong. Revna knew this man's body as well as she knew her own. She had watched him move through forests with the fluid grace of water over stone. She had felt him shift beside her in the darkness, every motion precise and purposeful. This was not that. This was stiff, mechanical, as if someone had wound a key in his back and set him walking. "I choose," he said, and his voice was hollow, stripped of every trace of the man who had whispered against her skin 3 days ago, Soraya Kale. The hall erupted into chaos. Howls of celebration tore through the air. Warriors slammed their fists against their chests in approval. Nobles embraced. The political marriage that would unite the two most powerful territories in the Dominion had been sealed. And Revna felt the world drop out from beneath her feet. A sound came from her throat that she did not recognize. Not a scream. Not a sob. Something deeper and more animal. A sound pulled from the place in her chest where she had stored every whispered promise, every stolen kiss, every moment she had believed she was loved. Through vision that swam with tears, she watched Fenric take Soraya's hand, watched him lift it to his lips, watched the copper-haired woman smile with the satisfaction of someone collecting a prize she had always known was hers. Fenric's face showed nothing. No triumph, no joy. No sorrow. Just the blank, terrible emptiness of a man who was not entirely present. He did not search the gallery. He did not hesitate. He did not look like a man who remembered that someone was watching from the shadows with her heart in pieces. Revna stumbled backward. Her side struck the gallery railing. Her vision tunneled. She needed to leave before the grief swallowed her whole, before she screamed his name from the balcony and brought every eye in Kelvros to the servant woman who had been foolish enough to love an alpha. She turned and ran. The service corridors were deserted. Revna's bare feet slapped against cold stone as she fled through passageways she had memorized over months of secret meetings. Left at the carved archway, down the narrow stairs, through the laundry stores that always smelled of cedar and lye. Her hand pressed against her lower belly as she ran, a gesture that had become instinctive over the past several weeks. The child. She had suspected for some time, but the healer in the market town had confirmed it just days ago. She was 5 months along with Fenric's child. She had planned to tell him tonight, after the ceremony, after he refused the candidates. She had imagined his face, the way his gray eyes would go wide, the way his hands would tremble as they settled on her stomach, the way he would pull her close and breathe her name against her hair. Instead, she was running through empty corridors with his betrayal ringing in her ears and his child growing beneath her heart. Revna reached her small chamber and closed the door with shaking hands. Then the tears came. They came without sound, pouring down her cheeks in hot streams that dripped from her jaw. Her body shook with the force of holding the sobs inside, because if she started screaming, she was not sure she would ever stop. 8 months of believing she was his mate. 8 months of sneaking through hidden passages to the chamber behind the waterfall, of hearing him tell her she was the only thing in his world that felt real. And he had stood on that obsidian floor with dead eyes and chosen someone else without a single moment of hesitation. Revna pressed both hands to her belly. "It is just us now," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "Just us." She began to pack. There was not much. A few changes of clothing. Her mother's bone-handled knife. The leather pouch of dried herbs she used for her healing work. A handful of copper coins saved from her wages. No letters from Fenric. He had never written to her. Everything between them had been spoken in darkness, sealed with touch, existing only in the space between their bodies where no one else could witness. The servant's gate opened onto a narrow path that wound down the hillside toward the northern road. Revna walked it without looking back. She did not see the figure that appeared at the gallery window moments after she left. She did not see the gray eyes that suddenly blazed with desperate, horrified awareness as they scanned the empty servant's wing below. And she did not hear the raw, ragged howl that tore from a man's throat and cut through the celebration like a blade. So sudden and so anguished that every wolf in Kelvros fell silent and turned toward the sovereignty hall with fear in their eyes. By the time Fenric reached her empty chamber, Revna was already gone. Revna walked through the night and into the next day. She followed the northern road until it split at the river crossing, then took the western fork that led away from the Grey March and into the wild territories that lay between the great packs. No wolf of standing traveled these lands. They were home to rogues, to outcasts, to those who had fallen through the cracks of the Dominion's rigid hierarchy. She fit right in. By the second day, her feet were blistered and bleeding. By the third, she had run out of food. The sickness came in waves that left her retching behind trees, her body rebelling against the journey even as her mind refused to stop moving. She could not stop. If she stopped, she would think. And if she thought, she would remember his voice saying Soraya's name, flat and hollow and empty of everything that had made her believe she mattered. On the fourth day, she reached the settlement of Brindell. It was barely a village, a cluster of stone and timber buildings huddled in a valley between two ridgelines, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a single rutted track. The kind of place that did not appear on maps. The kind of place where people came specifically to disappear. The elder who met her at the edge of the settlement was a weathered woman named Asla, whose sharp eyes took in Revna's exhausted face, her mud-caked cloak, and the protective way her arm curled around her midsection. "Running from something or someone?" Asla asked bluntly. "Both," Revna answered. "Can you work?" "I am a healer. Herbs, poultices, bone setting, wound treatment. I can deliver children." Asla studied her for a long moment. "We lost our last healer to the fever in autumn. There is an empty cottage at the far end of the valley, near the old growth. It is small and it needs repair, but it has a hearth and a sound roof." She paused. "What do we call you?" "Marin," Revna said. "My name is Marin." Asla nodded once, asking nothing further. In Brindell, a person's past was their own business, and so Revna became Marin, the healer woman who lived at the edge of the forest. She patched the cottage roof with her own hands. She cleared the garden of dead growth and planted the medicinal herbs she knew by heart. She treated the village children for coughs and fevers. She set the blacksmith's dislocated shoulder. She brewed sleeping draughts for the old farmer who had not slept properly since his wife's death. She built a life out of nothing, and she did it alone. The weeks became months. Winter deepened, then slowly released its grip. The first green shoots pushed through the frozen soil, and Revna's belly grew round and heavy beneath her woolen dress. She told the villagers her husband had died in a border skirmish. They accepted it without question, offering her firewood and extra provisions as her pregnancy advanced. At night, alone in her cottage with the fire low, she lay with her hands on her stomach and felt the child move. The movements were strange, forceful. Sometimes they came from two places at once, as if the baby were pushing outward in opposite directions simultaneously. The village midwife had raised her eyebrows during one examination and suggested that Revna might be carrying more than a single child. "You are strong," she murmured in the darkness. "Stronger than you know." She tried not to think about the mark. The mark should have been gone by now. Among wolf kind, when a mate bond was rejected, the claiming bite was supposed to fade into nothing within weeks. Clean skin, no trace, as if it had never existed. Fenric had bitten her on the inside of her left wrist, in the hollow where her pulse beat strongest. He had done it on the night of the autumn equinox, in the chamber behind the waterfall, with moonlight streaming through the gap in the rocks and his body curved around hers. "Now you carry me with you," he had breathed against the fresh mark. "Wherever you go, whatever happens, this cannot be undone." 4 months since the binding, and the mark had not faded. It had darkened. Where a thin silver scar should have gradually vanished, the bite had deepened to a bruised violet. It throbbed with warmth that woke her in the small hours of the morning. It ached when storms rolled in from the east, from the direction of the Grey March, as if the weather itself was carrying something toward her that the mark recognized. And sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, Revna felt something through the scar that terrified her. A presence, vast and desperate, clawing at the edges of her awareness like an animal trying to dig through a wall. Not hostile, not threatening, just searingly, overwhelmingly present, as if someone on the other end of a fraying rope was pulling with every ounce of their strength. It should not have been possible. Fenric had chosen another woman. The connection between them should have dissolved the moment he spoke Soraya's name, unless it was never truly broken. Revna refused to follow that thought. False hope was a luxury she could not afford, not with 2 lives depending on her ability to keep moving forward without looking back. She wrapped a strip of cloth around her wrist each morning to cover the mark, and she told herself it meant nothing. But every night, as the fire died and the cottage grew cold, the mark pulsed with warmth, and Revna lay awake wondering why a bond that should have been dead was growing stronger. The boy arrived at her door on a morning when the sky was the color of old iron. Revna had been grinding feverfew roots in her mortar when the knock came. She opened the door to find Torben, the tanner's youngest son, standing on her threshold with his cheeks flushed and his eyes wide with the particular excitement that only catastrophic news could produce in a 12-year-old. "Mistress Marin, you have to come hear this. Traders from the lowlands have come through the pass. They are in the square. Everyone is there." Revna's instinct was to close the door. Traders meant news from the wider world, and news from the wider world meant information about territories and alphas and politics she had spent months trying to forget existed. But refusing would draw more attention than simply going. She followed him down the muddy track to the village square, where 2 weathered men sat on overturned crates near the well, surrounded by most of Brindel's population. Revna hung back at the edge of the gathering, one hand resting on her belly beneath her shawl. 3 territories in open conflict, the older trader was saying, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man who knew the value of a good story. The Grey March, the Stoneward, and the Thorn Peak. Border skirmishes every week. Trade routes disrupted. The whole eastern half of the Dominion is destabilizing. Revna's pulse quickened at the mention of the Grey March. "What started it?" asked Osla from the front of the crowd. "To get all traces back to the Grey March Alpha. Fenric Ashvain. They say he has lost his mind, tore apart his own territory searching for a woman. Nobody knows who she is. He has sent wolves to every settlement in 4 territories, offered a bounty of 8,000 silver marks for information." 8,000 silver. More money than most wolves would see in a lifetime. His own advisors tried to restrain him, the younger trader added. He threw 3 of them through the walls of the council chamber. Physically, through stone walls. The Greymarch elders have formally requested intervention from the High Alpha's court. The Alpha King? Calum Draith himself? Word is, the king has taken a personal interest. They say Ashvain's instability is threatening to fracture the Eastern Alliance entirely. The baby kicked sharply against Revna's ribs, as if it too had heard its father's name and was responding. What about the woman he chose at the binding ceremony? Osla pressed. The Kyle daughter? The older trader shook his head. Soraya Kyle has been confined to the Kyle family estates. Ashvain apparently refused to complete the bond, would not touch her, would not even share a meal with her after the ceremony. Sent her back to her family within a week. Revna's knees nearly gave way. He had sent Soraya back. He had refused to complete the bond. Traitors gossip, Revna heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. It will change 3 times before it reaches the next village. She turned and walked back to her cottage before anyone could read her face. But once inside, with the door bolted, Revna sank to the floor and pressed both hands to her mouth. None of it made sense, unless the choice had never been real. The mark on her wrist flared with sudden heat, and through the ache she felt that presence again, closer now, more desperate, pressing against her awareness with a need so raw it made her eyes water. Hope was the most dangerous thing she could feel right now. Hope would make her hesitate. Hope would make her wait. And waiting in one place, with a bounty on her identity and traitors carrying news through every settlement, was how she would be found. But she did not run. She did not admit, even to herself, that some small, stubborn part of her wanted to be found. The wolves came at dusk on a day when the first wildflowers had begun to push through the thawing ground. Revna was hanging laundered cloth on the line behind her cottage when the feeling hit her. A prickling at the back of her neck. The instinct, buried deep in the animal part of her brain that told her she was being watched. She turned slowly. At the tree line, 60 yards from her back door, a shape stood motionless between 2 ancient pines. A wolf. Enormous, its shoulders level with the lowest branches, its coat a mottled gray and brown that blended with the bark. Its amber eyes were fixed on her with an intelligence that was unmistakably more than animal. A second wolf emerged to its left, then a third, a fourth. 4 massive wolves, arranged in a loose arc at the edge of the forest, watching her cottage with patient, deliberate focus. The mark on her wrist erupted with heat so sudden she cried out. The baby responded with a violent kick that doubled her over. They had found her. She stumbled toward the cottage door, her mind racing through options. The forest was no escape against wolves who were born to hunt woodland. She could not run. She could not hide. She was 9 months pregnant and alone and utterly, completely trapped. The knock on her front door was a fist. Human. Controlled. 3 deliberate strikes. Mistress Marin. A man's voice, deep and measured. Please open the door. We are not here to harm you. Revna grabbed the fire iron from beside the hearth and opened the door. The man who had spoken was tall, with a lean, weathered face and hair the color of bleached straw cropped close to his skull. His pale blue eyes settled on Revna's face with an expression that shifted from assessment to recognition to something that looked remarkably like relief. My name is Hadron Voss, he said. I serve as second to the Alpha of the Greymarch. I have been searching for you for a very long time, my lady. You have the wrong person. My name is Marin. I am a healer. Hadron's gaze dropped to her left wrist, where the cloth wrapping had shifted during her scramble for the fire iron. The edge of the mark was visible, dark violet against her pale skin. You are Revna Ashford, formerly an herb worker in the northern kitchens of the Kelvros complex. You bear Alpha Ashvain's claiming bite on your left wrist, And you carry his child. His eyes moved to her belly. Or perhaps his children. How do you know about the mark? Because Fenric has described it to every wolf in 3 territories. Because he drew it from memory on parchment and had copies distributed to every patrol, every scout, every contact we have in the wild territories and beyond. Hadron paused. And because I was there the night he gave it to you, standing guard outside the waterfall chamber, pretending I heard nothing. The admission landed like a stone in still water. You knew about us, Revna whispered. Since the beginning. Fenric trusted me with the secret because he needed someone to ensure your safety during your meetings. Hadron's expression hardened. Which is why what happened at the binding has eaten at me every day since. Because I was there, and I saw it happen. And I did not understand what I was seeing until it was too late. She stepped aside and let him in. Hadron looked around her small cottage, taking in the drying herbs strung from the ceiling beams, the worn table, the narrow bed. His jaw tightened at the modesty of it. The true mate of an alpha, living in a one-room cottage at the edge of nowhere. Fenric did not choose Soraya Kale, he said. Not willingly, not consciously, not in any way that reflects the man I have served for 11 years. Revna lowered herself into the chair by the hearth because her legs would no longer hold her. The evening before the binding, the Kale family sent a cask of aged mead to Fenric's quarters. Protocol required him to drink from it. The mead was laced with gray wolfsbane, night bloom extract, and at least 2 other compounds our healers have not been able to name. Enough to sever the connection between a wolf and his conscious will, his instincts, his bond sense, his ability to recognize his own mate, all suppressed. What stood on that ceremonial floor was Fenric's body operating on the most basic level of function. He could walk, he could speak, he could follow simple prompts. But the man inside was gone. The room tilted around Revna. The effects lasted approximately 70 hours. When they wore off, Fenric woke with no memory of the ceremony, no memory of choosing Soraya. The first word he spoke was your name. The first thing he did was run to the servants' wing to find you. And when he found your chamber empty, when he realized you had gone, Hadron paused. I have served that man through border wars. I have never seen him afraid until that moment. Tears were streaming down Revna's face. His wolf fights him for control constantly. He has nearly gone feral twice. His territory is fracturing because every fiber of his being is pulling him toward you. Revna's hand moved to her wrist. The mark pulsed steadily, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. He feels that, Hadron said quietly. Every time the mark flares, he feels an answering fire. He says it is the only thing that tells him you are still alive. Drugged. He had been drugged. The dead eyes, the mechanical movements, the hollow voice. It had not been rejection. It had been theft. The Kales, Revna said, and her voice came out raw and dangerous. Hadron nodded and withdrew a folded piece of paper from his coat, its broken seal bearing the Kyle family crest. The message inside was 4 lines. The herb woman has been located in the western settlements. She carries the Ashvane heir. Both must be eliminated before the next moon cycle. The line of succession must remain clear for Soraya's future children. They want to kill my child, Revna breathed. Before Hadron could respond, a howl split the evening air. Not a warning. A hunting call, sharp and urgent. Hadron was on his feet instantly. Stay inside, bar the door. Do not open it for anyone except me or Fenric. He shifted mid-stride, his body exploding into wolf form before he cleared the doorframe. Pale fur streaked across her yard and vanished into the tree line where his escort wolves were already forming a defensive line. And from the forest, stepping out of the shadows with coordinated precision, came shapes that were darker, leaner, and moving with the unmistakable intent of predators who had found their prey. The first arrow came through the kitchen window and buried itself in the wall 3 inches from Revna's head. She threw herself sideways, hitting the floor hard. Through the shattered window, she could hear combat erupting in the tree line. Snarls, the crack of bone. A second arrow punched through the cottage door. Revna saw the gleam of dark liquid on its tip. Blackthorn extract, fatal within minutes. They were not trying to capture her. They were trying to end her quickly. Outside, a wolf's yelp of pain cut through the night, followed by silence. One of Hadrian's escort wolves. Down. Then another yelp. Another silence. They were being picked apart. A wolf leapt through the shattered window. Revna swung the fire iron with everything she had, connecting with its skull mid-leap. It crashed into the wall beside the hearth, dazed but not finished. It gathered itself to lunge again. A blur of pale fur smashed through the ruined front door and intercepted it. Hadrian. His jaws locked around the assassin's throat and bore it to the ground. But Hadrian did not rise cleanly. Blood streamed from a gash across his ribs that ran the length of his body. He shifted back to human form, collapsing against the wall. The wound was deep enough to show bone. 8. Maybe 9 of them, he managed. We killed 3. Lost 2 of ours. The rest are regrouping. He coughed. There is something I did not tell you. Fenric is closer than I suggested. I sent word to him before I knocked on your door. He is coming. But I do not know if he will arrive in time. A hunting howl rose from the forest. The remaining assassins were done waiting. Revna looked at Hadrian's torn body. Looked at the shadows closing in between the trees with unhurried confidence, and something inside her shifted. Healing was not supposed to manifest in wolves without noble lineage. It was rare even among highborn families. Revna had hidden hers since childhood, using her knowledge of herbs as a cover for the real power that hummed beneath her skin. The power to mend torn flesh with a touch, to knit bone with a thought, to pour life back into a body that was emptying. In the rigid hierarchy of the Dominion, a common wolf displaying a noble gift was not celebrated. She was destroyed. But the wolves outside were going to kill Hadrian. Were going to kill her. Were going to kill the children inside her. Revna was done hiding. She pressed her palms flat against Hadrian's ruined ribcage. The light came like sunrise. It bloomed from her hands in waves of pale gold, warm and ancient. Hadrian gasped as his broken ribs realigned beneath her fingers. The gash knitted closed in 3 heartbeats. The color returned to his face. "What are you?" he breathed. "Angry," Revna said. She walked through the shattered doorframe into the clearing. The golden light clung to her skin, turning the blood-soaked grass luminous. Every wolf in the clearing turned to stare at the pregnant woman glowing like something from the old stories. She knelt beside the nearest fallen escort wolf and pressed her hands to its flank. The torn body began to mend, wounds closing, breathing deepening. One of the assassin wolves charged. The light around Revna flared like a detonation. The wolf was hurled backward, its dark fur scorching, and bolted into the forest. 2 more followed, their nerves shattered. But a figure stepped from the shadow of the largest pine. Human form. Female. A mask carved from dark wood in the shape of a snarling wolf. She drew a short sword coated in blackthorn. The Kales will be fascinated to learn that the herb woman is something considerably more than advertised. Revna's light flickered. The healing had drained her reserves dangerously low. The masked woman raised the sword, and the forest behind her came apart. Trees snapped at their bases and toppled outward in a circle. The ground shuddered. Birds erupted from every branch, and a wolf came through the destroyed tree line at a speed that defied everything Revna understood about the physical world. It was enormous. Its fur the color of dark iron, so deep it swallowed the moonlight. Its eyes burned with pale, furious silver that left after images in the air. This was not Fenric. The iron wolf hit the masked woman with the force of a collapsing wall. She was flung into the darkness with a crack of breaking bone. The remaining assassin wolves fled in blind terror. Then those silver eyes found Revna. The killing fury drained from its posture, its massive head lowered until it was level with her belly. It approached slowly, each step careful, deliberate, and pressed its nose to the curve of her stomach with impossible gentleness. Both babies kicked simultaneously. Two distinct impacts, answering the presence against their mother's body with a recognition that transcended thought. The wolf made a sound, low and broken. Something between a growl and a whimper that carried more anguish than Revna had ever heard from any living creature. "Who are you?" she whispered. One heartbeat, a wolf. The next, a man kneeling before her in the blood and mud of her ruined yard, his hands hovering over her stomach without quite touching. His dark hair was matted with sweat. His silver eyes were rimmed with red exhaustion and bright with tears he was making no effort to hide. "You healed them," he said, his voice raw and fractured. "I felt it from 3 leagues away. The light. I felt it and I ran." "I do not know you," Revna said. "No, but I know you, Revna Ashford. I have known about you since the night Fenric first claimed you. He came to me for counsel. He told me he had found his true mate in a common-born healer and he did not know what to do." His silver eyes searched her face. "My name is Calum Draith. I am the Alpha King of the Iron Vast Dominion, and Fenric Ashvane is my brother." "His brother," Revna repeated. "Half-brother. Same father, different mothers." Fenric was raised in the Grey March under the Ashvane name to protect him from the politics of the royal court. Calum's jaw tightened. "A decision I have regretted every day since this nightmare began." Behind them, Hadron emerged from the cottage, fully healed, his expression shifting from combat readiness to shock as he registered who was kneeling in the clearing. "My king," Hadron breathed. Calum did not look away from Revna. "Rise, Voss. Report later. Right now, I need her to understand." Revna's mind was reeling. Fenric was the Alpha King's brother. The children inside her carried royal blood. The Kyle family had not merely been angling for territorial control through marriage, they had been positioning themselves one step from the throne of the entire dominion. "Where is Fenric?" she demanded. Pain crossed Calum's face. "That is why I am here, instead of him." "The severed bond is destroying him, Revna. His wolf has been fighting for dominance since the night you disappeared. 3 weeks ago, he stopped being able to shift back to human form. He is trapped in his wolf. Feral. Barely recognizing the men who have served him for a decade. 4 of my strongest wolves are required to keep him restrained." The mark on her wrist was pulsing in rapid, erratic bursts that felt less like a heartbeat and more like a distress signal. "He feels you," Calum said quietly, watching her grip her wrist. "Even trapped in his wolf with his mind fracturing. Every time the mark flares, he surfaces for a moment, recognizes his own name, then sinks again." Tears spilled down Revna's cheeks. All those nights feeling the desperate presence clawing at her consciousness. It had not been her imagination. It had been Fenric, drowning, reaching for her through the only connection that still functioned. And she had been covering the mark each morning and telling herself it meant nothing. If the bond is not restored soon, he will be lost permanently. The man you love will cease to exist, and what remains will be a feral alpha with enough power to destroy everything in his path. "I left him," she whispered. "I saw him choose another woman, and I ran. I did not fight. I did not question. I did not trust what we had enough to stay and demand an explanation." "You saw your mate reject you in front of 3,000 wolves while carrying his child," Calum said firmly. "You did what any wolf in that position would do. You survived. You protected your young. There is no shame in that. There is if he dies, because I was not there. Then come back with me." Now. Tonight. If I go back, the Kales will come for me again. Calem's eyes hardened to polished steel. Let them come. Let them try to harm the true mate of my brother and the mother of royal heirs under my protection. Protection was not enough to stop them from poisoning Fenric in the first place. Calem flinched, and Revna saw genuine anguish beneath the authority. No, he admitted. It was not. I failed my brother. I failed to see the Khal conspiracy forming beneath my own rule, and you and your children have paid the price for my blindness. He met her eyes. I am asking you to trust me despite that failure, not because I have earned it, because Fenric is out of time. Revna looked at this man, the most powerful wolf in the world, kneeling before her in the dirt and openly admitting his failure. There was no arrogance in him, no command dressed as a request, just a brother terrified of losing the only family he had left. How long does he have? She asked. Days. Perhaps less. Revna closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Fenric's face, gray eyes bright with warmth. The crooked way he smiled when he thought no one was watching. The way his voice dropped to a whisper when he said her name, as if it was something sacred that required reverence. She opened her eyes. Then we leave now. They rode through the night on horses that Calem's advance guard had waiting beyond the forest. Revna sat before the Alpha King as his wolves flanked them in a protective formation that stretched a quarter-mile in every direction. Nothing was getting through that perimeter. But as dawn broke and the familiar ridgelines of the Eastern Territories appeared on the horizon, a rider came galloping toward them with a face drained of all color. My king. Lord Aldrin Kale marched 3,000 warriors through the eastern pass under cover of darkness. They took the Grey March stronghold 4 hours ago. The garrison was overwhelmed. Lord Kale has declared Fenric unfit for rule and claimed emergency authority over the Grey March. Calem's body went rigid behind Revna. The containment sanctum, Calem said, and his voice was controlled in the way that a blade is controlled before it falls. Where they are holding Fenric. The Kales have it. They have Fenric. And Lord Kale has taken hostages from the Grey March households who refused to submit. 42 wolves, including women and children. If you approach with force, they will be executed. Starting with Fenric. Revna felt the moment the Alpha King's restraint came within a hair's width of breaking. The power radiating from his body spiked so sharply that the horses shied, and the nearest wolves flattened their ears against their skulls. For 3 heartbeats, she was sitting in front of something that was more force of nature than man. Then Calem locked it down behind a wall of iron discipline. There may be another way into the sanctum, he said, turning to Revna. Something complicated moved behind his expression. A passage connecting to the old healing chambers, built centuries ago so that wounded wolves could be moved to containment without being seen. It is too narrow for warriors in shifted form, too well concealed for the Kales to have found in 4 hours. You want me to go through the passage? If anyone can pull Fenric back from the feral state, it is you. The bond, the mark, your presence. It is the only thing that has any chance of bringing him back. He paused. But I am asking you to walk into an occupied stronghold through a tunnel beneath 3,000 enemy wolves. While you do what? While I give Lord Kale something else to focus on. Revna thought about the babies inside her, thought about the risk, thought about what kind of mother walks into a siege when she is weeks away from giving birth. Then she thought about what kind of mother lets the father of her children disappear into madness without doing everything in her power to bring him home. Show me the passage, she said. The passage was exactly as terrible as Revna had expected. Narrow, lightless. The walls slick with condensation and something that smelled of rust and old stone. She moved through it sideways in places, her swollen belly scraping against the rock, her hands braced against the walls for balance. Hadron had wanted to come with her, but his shoulders were too broad for the tightest sections. She was alone. Above her, Muffled by tons of stone, she could hear the rumble of activity. Boots on flagstone, shouted orders, the Kale forces securing their stolen prize. And somewhere ahead, beneath all of that, the bond. It was different now. Stronger. Wilder. The closer she got, the more it overwhelmed her senses. Raw emotion pouring through the connection in waves that made her stagger. Rage so vast it had no edges. Fear so primal it bypassed thought entirely. And beneath everything, a grief so deep and so absolute that Revna had to stop walking and press her fist against her mouth to keep from crying out. He was in agony. She kept moving. The passage ended at a stone door fitted so precisely into the wall that its seams were invisible from the other side. Revna found the release mechanism by touch, an iron lever recessed into the rock at shoulder height, and pulled. The containment sanctum was a circular chamber carved from living rock, 30 paces across. Iron sconces held torches that gave smoky light. The walls were scored with deep claw marks that furrowed the stone as if it were clay. The floor was stained with blood, some old and dark, some fresh and bright. And in the center of the room, chained to the floor by 4 heavy iron links driven into bedrock, was a wolf. His fur was deep, stormy gray, matted with blood and filth. His ribs showed through his coat. His body was covered in wounds from throwing himself against the chains and from the fights that had preceded his capture. He lay on his side with his chest heaving in shallow, erratic bursts. His eyes were open, but they were wrong, clouded, unfocused. The eyes of a creature that had retreated so far inside itself that almost nothing remained at the surface. Feral. Revna's heart broke. Fenric, she said softly. The wolf's ear twitched, the faintest movement. But his eyes did not clear. She stepped closer. A low growl built in his chest, vibrating through the stone floor. His lips pulled back from stained teeth. He was going to lunge. The feral wolf did not recognize her voice, did not recognize anything human. Revna knelt. She knelt on the blood-stained floor of the sanctum, 3 feet from a feral alpha who could tear her apart in a single motion. She knelt with her hands on her belly and her wrist exposed, the dark violet scar visible in the torchlight. "You gave me this," she said, "on the night of the autumn equinox, behind the waterfall. You bit me right here, and you told me that now I carried you with me wherever I went." The growl faltered. "You said it could not be undone. And you were right. I spent months trying to convince myself it was over. Telling myself you chose someone else, covering this mark every morning and pretending it was not pulsing every single night." She held her wrist closer to him. But it would not stop. And do you know why it would not stop, Fenric? Because you were right. It cannot be undone. Not by poison, not by distance, not by anything the Kyles or any other force in this world could devise. The wolf's clouded eyes fixed on her wrist. On the mark, something shifted behind those eyes. A flicker, barely visible, like a candle flame glimpsed through heavy fog. "Come back," Revna whispered. "Your children need their father. I need you. Please." She pressed her marked wrist against the wolf's muzzle. The bond detonated. She felt his consciousness slam into hers. Not the feral wolf. Him. Fenric. Buried deep beneath layers of madness and animal instinct, fighting his way toward the surface with everything he had left. She felt his memories crash through her. Waking with her name on his lips. The empty chamber. The scent of pine needles fading from her pillow. Months of searching, of howling, of driving himself past every boundary of endurance while the bond gave him nothing back except the faint pulse of a mark that told him she was alive somewhere. She felt the moment his wolf had finally overwhelmed him. The surrender. The loss of self. The last coherent thought he had clung to before the darkness took him. Find her. Find her. Find her. And she felt, with a clarity that made her sob aloud, the moment he recognized her. The clouded eyes blazed with sudden piercing gray, clear as winter sky. The growl transformed into a keen of recognition and relief, and shattered grief that echoed off the sanctum walls. He shifted. It was violent, desperate, his body tearing between forms as if the wolf and the man were fighting over who got to reach her first. Chains that had held a wolf's limbs hung loose around a man's wrists. Fenric knelt before her, trembling and wrecked. His gray eyes found her face. "You are real," he said, and his voice was a ruin, scraped raw by weeks of howling. "You are here." His gaze dropped to her belly. "Yours," she said. "They are yours, Fenric. Both of them." He reached for her, then stopped. His hands hovered between them, shaking. "I do not know if I deserve to touch you," he whispered. Revna took his hands and pressed them to her stomach. Both babies kicked at once. Fenric's eyes went wide. His fingers spread across her belly, feeling the movement, feeling the life, the physical proof that what they had created together had survived everything done to destroy it. He crumbled. The alpha of the Grey March collapsed forward and pressed his forehead against her belly and wept. Not quiet tears. The raw, gasping sobs of a man who had been holding himself together with nothing but rage and the faint pulse of a bond, and who could finally stop. Revna held him. Her fingers combed through his matted hair. Through the bond that blazed between them, she let him feel everything. Her flight through the wild territories, the cottage in Brindell, the fierce, stubborn love that had survived exile and months of believing she meant nothing to him. And he showed her his. The horror of waking with no memory and no mate. The wolf that had consumed him inch by inch until there was nothing left but the single fraying thread connecting him to the woman he would have torn the world apart to find. When they finally separated, Fenric cupped her face in his chained hands. "I will spend the rest of my life making this right," he said hoarsely. "Every day, every breath. I will earn back what was stolen from us." "Start by getting out of those chains," Revna said. For the first time in months, Fenric smiled. Small and broken and exhausted, but his. The crooked one he used when he thought no one was watching. He snapped the chains like thread. The door of the containment sanctum burst open, and Fenric and Revna stepped into the corridor beneath the Grey March stronghold. Above them, the sounds of battle had erupted. Calum had made his move. The walls shook with impacts that sent dust raining from the ceiling. Distant howls mixed with the clash of steel. But the corridor directly ahead was not empty. Standing at the far end, flanked by 4 armored wolves in their human forms, was Lord Aldrin Kale. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the sharp features and calculating eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime bending the world to his specifications. He wore ceremonial armor embossed with the serpent and mountain crest of his house, and in his hand he held a sword with a blade that gleamed with an unnatural sheen. Wolfsbane steel. Beside him stood Soraya. The copper-haired woman looked nothing like the triumphant figure who had ascended the ceremonial platform at the binding. Her face was drawn, her eyes hard, her posture that of someone who had stopped pretending elegance and was operating on pure venom. "So," Aldrin said, "the feral dog has found his kennel mate. How touching." Fenric stepped in front of Revna, a growl vibrating through the stone. "You drugged me," Fenric said, and his voice carried a calm far more dangerous than rage. "You poisoned my wine, stole my will, used my own body to break the bond with my true mate, and nearly cost me my mind. You sent assassins to murder the mother of my children, and now you stand in my stronghold and call yourself the authority here." "I call myself the only rational wolf in this territory," Aldrin replied. An alpha with royal blood who chose a common-born servant over the most strategically valuable alliance in the Dominion. My daughter would have made you a king. Instead, you threw it all away for a woman with no name and no bloodline. She has my mark, Fenric said quietly. She carries my heirs. She walked through a passage beneath this stronghold to pull me back from a madness your family inflicted. She has more claim to stand beside me than your daughter will ever have. Soraya stepped forward, her expression twisted with fury. I was chosen, before 3,000 witnesses, before the bond speaker. The rites were completed. I am the legitimate. You are nothing, Revna said. She stepped out from behind Fenric. Everyone in the corridor turned to look at her. The common-born servant, heavy with pregnancy, barefoot, still wearing the simple woolen dress from her cottage in Brindell. Not a woman who looked like she belonged in the same room as lords and alphas and political conspiracies. But the golden light was building behind her eyes. Everything you built was founded on theft and deception. You did not win Fenric. You stole a puppet and called it a victory. She turned to Aldrin. And you sent wolves to murder a pregnant woman, to kill children who had not yet drawn breath. Whatever authority you claim, that is what you are. A man who ordered the death of babies to protect a political arrangement. Aldrin's grip tightened on the wolfsbane sword. Sentiment. The last refuge of wolves who cannot see the larger picture. Guards. Kill the woman. He never finished. The ceiling exploded downward as something massive smashed through the floor of the main hall above. Stone and timber rained into the corridor. Aldrin's guards scattered. Calum Draith dropped through the gap in his human form, landing in a crouch that cracked the flagstones beneath his boots. His dark iron wolf had done the demolition. The man had come to deliver the sentence. Lord Aldrin Kale, you are charged with conspiracy against the Iron Vast Crown, poisoning a wolf of royal blood, attempted murder of the true mate and unborn heirs of a royal line, insurrection, seizure of territory by force, and treason. You have no authority over territorial. I have every authority. Fenric Ashvane is my brother, my blood. The children his mate carries are my kin. You did not merely conspire against a territorial alpha Kale, you conspired against the royal house itself. The corridor fell silent. Aldrin looked from Kylum to Fenric, and Revna watched the moment the full weight of his miscalculation settled onto his shoulders. He had gambled everything on the assumption that Fenric was an isolated alpha with no connections powerful enough to challenge the Kale family's influence. He had been catastrophically wrong. Aldrin raised his wolfsbane sword. Fenric shifted mid-stride, his gray wolf sleek and blazing with purpose, a bond fully restored and a wolf fully integrated with its human half. His jaws closed around Aldrin's sword arm. The wolfsbane steel clattered to the ground. Calum's wolves poured through the breach in the ceiling, overwhelming the Kale guards in seconds. Soraya, seeing her father disarmed and her family's warriors falling, grabbed the wolfsbane sword from the floor and turned toward Revna with murder in her eyes. If I cannot have what was promised to me, then neither will you. She lunged. Revna did not run. She did not call for Fenric or Calum. She did not reach for the golden healing light. She reached for the wolf inside her. She had never shifted. Common-born wolves with no bloodline rarely could, but she carried the children of a royal bloodline. She bore the claiming mark of an alpha whose bond had been tested past every limit and refused to break. And the power that had been building inside her, the healing light, the fierce protectiveness, the stubborn will that had carried her through exile and heartbreak and a siege. It was not merely healing magic. It was wolf. The shift took her like a wave. No pain, no struggle, just a single, seamless transformation. Her fur was the color of pale gold, glowing faintly with the same healing light that had scattered assassins and mended broken bodies. She caught the wolfsbane sword between her teeth, wrenching it from Soraya's grip, and spat the poisoned blade into the rubble. Soraya fell to her knees, not from a blow, from the sheer, overwhelming force of an alpha's mate in full manifestation. The dominance radiating from Revna's wolf form pressed Soraya down like a physical weight, stripping away every pretense of authority until there was nothing left but a woman on her knees before a power she had gravely underestimated. Revna shifted back to human. What remains when the theft and deception are stripped away is the truth, Revna said quietly, and the truth is that you never had a claim to any of this. Fenric crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The bond was completed that night in the Alpha King's war tent, pitched on the hillside above the Greymarch stronghold under a sky brilliant with stars. No grand ceremony. There were no thousands of witnesses, no bond speaker, no ceremonial fire trenches or obsidian floors, just Fenric and Revna, alone, with the canvas walls filtering the moonlight into silver. He bared his throat to her in the ancient gesture, offering himself completely. "Claim me," he said. "Make it permanent. Make it so that nothing in this world or any other can ever take me from you again." Revna's teeth found the place where his neck met his shoulder, and she bit down. The bond ignited. It was not like the frantic, desperate connection they had felt in the sanctum. This was something else. Something whole. 2 halves of a single existence flowing together with the inevitability of rivers reaching the sea. She felt his soul pour into hers, and hers into his. Every barrier dissolved, every wall dismantled, every wound exposed and healed in the same instant. She saw herself through his eyes. Not a servant, not a nobody. A woman of staggering courage who had survived the worst thing he could imagine and emerged stronger. The healer who had walked into a siege to save him. The mother who had carried his children alone through months of exile without breaking. His true mate. The center of his existence. The one thing in the world he would never deserve and would spend every remaining day trying to be worthy of. And he saw himself through hers. Not the hollow puppet from the ceremony, not the feral wolf chained to a stone floor. The man who had fought his way back from madness because somewhere in the darkest pit of his disintegrating mind, the bond had whispered her name, and he had followed the sound. The man whose love had been tested and had never, not for a single moment, wavered. When she released him, the mark on her wrist and the new mark on his throat pulsed in perfect synchrony. 2 heartbeats, 1 rhythm. "My mate," he whispered against her hair. "My heart. My home." "Always," she answered. "From now until the last star burns out." In the weeks that followed, the Kyle family faced judgment before the assembled packs of the Iron Vast Dominion. Lord Aldrin was stripped of his titles and territories and sentenced to permanent exile in the frozen reaches beyond the northern boundary. Soraya was given the same sentence, her wolf suppressed by the bond speaker's rights, condemned to live out her days as exactly the kind of nothing she had once dismissed Revna as being. The evidence of their conspiracy was laid bare before the Dominion Court. The poisoned mead, the intercepted assassination orders, the coordinated seizure of the Greymarch stronghold. When the full scope of what the Kales had done became clear, even the houses that had previously supported their political ambitions turned against them in disgust. Fenric's territory stabilized almost overnight. The crops that had withered began to recover. The livestock that had sickened grew strong again. The wolves who had grown restless and aggressive calmed the moment the bond between their alpha and his true mate was completed. The land responded to the bond as it always had throughout the history of the Dominion. A bonded alpha was a stable alpha, and a stable alpha meant a thriving territory. The truth of Fenric's royal blood was announced to the Dominion by Calum himself. Not as a political maneuver, but as a declaration of family. The brother he had hidden to protect was hidden no longer. The Greymarch would remain Fenric's territory, but it would now stand under the direct protection of the Iron Vast Crown. And on a warm evening in late spring, when the wildflowers had turned the valley around the Greymarch stronghold into a sea of color, Revna gave birth to twins. A boy with his father's gray eyes and a howl that startled the attendants. A girl with golden fur when she shifted for the first time, 3 minutes after being born, and the youngest wolf to ever manifest the ability in recorded Dominion history. Fenric held his daughter in one arm and his son in the other, and he did not bother to hide the tears that ran down his face. "You saved me," he said to Revna, who lay exhausted but radiant, her hand resting on the mark at her wrist that now glowed with a soft, steady silver. "You walked through fire and darkness and you brought me back. You brought all of us back." Revna reached up and touched the claiming mark on his throat, the mark that matched hers. The marks that told the world, in a language older than words, that these two wolves belonged to each other. "You were never lost," she said softly. "You were just waiting for me to find you." He leaned down and kissed her, their children nestled safely between them, the bond humming in their chests like a song that would never end. Outside the window, the wolves of the Greymarch lifted their voices in a howl that rolled across the valley and echoed off the mountains and carried into the night sky. A celebration, a homecoming, a beginning. The story of a healer who found a wounded wolf and changed the fate of a kingdom. Of an alpha who lost everything and clawed his way back from the edge of oblivion for the woman he loved. Of a bond that was tested by poison and betrayal and separation and refused, absolutely and completely refused, to break. They had found each other against every odd the world could stack against them, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment letting us know what you thought.